Well, now this is a Monday morning, is it? Is this a Monday morning?
Correct.
Oh,
Monday
whoa! I
afternoon,
got it
Jude,
right! I got
exactly.
it right!
One day you're going to get it right.
A stop clock tells the right time twice a day. Anyway, how are you today, Pat? Are you fighting fit? Is your
It's grand.
brain?
Hey, Jude, it's cold, but I think it's like Canada.
Uh,
That sort of cold, the sun's shining.
aye,
You
aye,
know,
aye.
it's been 2 or 3 days, like I said. Right, I think it's
Uh,
only about 6 degrees out there, but it's beautiful.
well, you enjoy it while you can. The beauty's fleeting. It's going to be a bloody torrent of wind and rain and so on for about most of the week, as far as
So I believe, yeah, yeah,
Anyway, let's two important things. This is the thing we're going to concentrate on, or at least start with today, is a book which we haven't read called "Perils
yeah.
and Possibilities of a United Ireland," and it's written by a man called Pádraig O'Malley, who is a man who has spent his life. He's from Dublin, but he spent his life as an academic in the States, I gather, and he's at the University of Massachusetts. And I'm assuming that this is an interest he has had for some time. Now, we haven't read the book, but we have looked at the video, and I'll put up the
Yeah.
link to the video on my website if people want to look at it. But I find it very interesting. It goes on for quite a while. He's interviewed by Sam McBride, late of the newsletter and now currently of the Belfast Telegraph and Sun and the Independent. You watched it too, Pat.
Yeah.
What were your first impressions of it?
Julian, something, I would love to say that I agreed with everything the man said, but I really didn't. I think he comes at a lot of things from an academic point of view. And, like I'll just boil it down to one thing. In the middle of it all, Robert McCartney gets up and he sort of says,
This is in the
about
audience.
he's in the audience and he says about Sinn Féin and that it's a conspiracy theory that Danny Morrison got up and said. Maybe this is unfair to O'Malley, but I'm talking about the whole thing of the overall thing.
Yeah.
That they get up with. Was it Danny Morrison with the Armalite in one hand and the ballot box in the other? And he said that he accused O'Malley of leaving this sort of thing out of his book and so on. And I sort of started to think to myself, is anyone seriously thinking in the Bogside in 1969 and people like Martin McGuinness had read Marxist theory about, taking power and all this? It's bullshit. And you see, O'Malley, the thought occurred to me, I listened to O'Malley as well, and for some sort of strange thing, your intro, you said he was an academic, had spent most of his life in America. And I got, from listening to his answers, dude, that was exactly the point I got, that he's an academic who has spent most of his time in America. A lot of the stuff, it's all very good and well thought through, but I'm not sure that it's happening on the ground where it should. And like a lot of things he said, Jude, I would dispute. But I mean, I'm ranting on here. What did you think of it?
Well, I start with that thing about Robert McCartney, who popped up during the discussion and raised, as you say, this thing about Danny Morrison having talked about the Armalite in one hand and the ballot box in the other, taking power in Ireland. And he then went on to say, and this is what has happened. This is what has happened.
Yeah.
Sinn Féin are in power. And they used the Armalite to get to where they are. Well, there's some truth in that. There's some truth in that. Certainly, Republicans.
But there's a lot of untruth in it too, Jude.
Yes, there is. Well, I'll tell you the truth in it as I see it. That the armed campaign was part of what led to power sharing in the North at one stage, at least. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
The thing that I didn't agree with him on, the impression he gave, was that this was a terribly unfair thing, unjust, violent, etc., as if all other problems have been solved after a thoughtful academic debate. As to coming to power, I mean, he missed out on the fact that the coming to power involved people going into voting booths, putting their mark up as candidates,
that's exactly
and
right.
electing them. So I thought Robert McCartney hasn't changed very much through the years. As O'Malley himself said from the stage, I know you. I've met you before, and you can talk, which I thought quite a good put down. But it does come to a question of O'Malley himself. What this is very witty tome, some 500 pages or something, I gather. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's he has interviewed something like 97 people, and I'm not sure how he incorporates those, whether he gives sections to those or whether he mixes it into a sort of a narrative that he himself conveys. He starts off early on, or at least Sam McBride asks him questions, and he then responds with that he's critical of Sinn Féin. He says
Yeah.
they're open to, they say they're open to all sorts of things. They're open to the idea
Yeah.
in a new Ireland of a different flag, open to the idea of some role for the monarchy, open to any number of ideas.
Yeah.
He says the snag with that is the Unionists don't believe them. They
Yeah.
believe that since the Republicans will not give expression to Unionist identity in the North, as things are, there I go, say North instead of Northern Ireland. They won't even
Yeah.
say Northern Ireland. They see
Yeah.
Northern Ireland as illegitimate. They don't believe in it. And so unions don't believe that Sinn Féin are serious when they say they are open to all sorts of ideas in a citizens' assembly. What's your reaction to that one?
Jude, I think that's where I started losing Mr. O'Malley somewhat, because I think he believes that as well. And if that's his analysis, he's totally, completely, and utterly wrong, in my opinion. Jude, if you're subsumed in 21 into a northern state against your will, with a packed majority, a sectarian state, do you anybody seriously think, oh, this is lovely, let's accept all the, a lot of people in the nationalist community say, bollocks to this, we're here. And there's zero recognition of our identity, our Irishness. It's been rammed down our throat. We're being told this place is called Northern Ireland and so on. Your flag is not recognised, your language is not recognised, your religion is not recognised, and you're here under our jurisdiction and like it or lump it. Do you seriously think anybody's going to say, oh, let's salute the royal flag, let's salute the Union Jack, let's be loyal to the Queen and all the rest of it? I think the implication was that the Sinn Féin couldn't be generous in Northern Ireland, so why would Unionists believe in a United Ireland to be generous? Jude, there was no place for them to be generous. There was no space for them to be generous. And if my argument would be, if an event of United Ireland, we can be as generous as the day is long when it's our choice to be generous. But when you don't have the choice, where's the generosity?
I think I agree with you completely. However, I do think that he's onto something when he says that unionists don't believe the idea of New Ireland being open to
Jude, can I ask you, but do you believe that analysis, that if he believes that, surely there's a flaw somewhere in his analysis?
Well, there is a flaw. A starting flaw, and I would say, is he's talking about a citizens' assembly. And he's talking about that as if Sinn Féin were sitting in the middle of that citizens' assembly, saying all these. That's not what a citizens' assembly is going to be. Sinn Féin will not be in a citizens' assembly, except as some part of a cross section of the population. So I think that's false. I think Sinn Féin are sincere in terms of being open to possibilities. The people he's talking about, who say they won't want any change in their flag, they won't want any role for the monarchy, and so on. Those are some of the people in the South who were asked, would they agree to these things in a United Ireland? Not Sinn Féin party, not Sinn Féin supporters.
No. And the other thing as well, Jude, we've said this a million times, you have to prepare the ground. You have to prepare a pathway. There's nothing happened yet. There hasn't been a forum. There hasn't been policy documents put out for public consumption. There hasn't been a real education process and said, look, in the event of United Ireland, and here's what's going to happen. We're going to put it out to a plebiscite, and we might change the national anthem. Would Danny Boy, the Londonderry Air, be acceptable as the national anthem? Or whatever. I'm only making. Would you accept? That maybe Stormont should continue as a sub-parliament of Dublin, sort of regional parliament or a canton-style parliament for several years. Should we rejoin a loose affiliation of the Commonwealth or something? All those things could be put out, and up to the people then to accept or reject them. But none of that groundwork has been done to even to put it out there so that people can actually even discuss it, never mind agree it.
That's very true. He did talk about the idea of having a plebiscite or having a vote border poll in 2032. Actually, he said 1032 at one point, and then he said, Sam corrected him and said 2032, which is, to me, seems much too long, given the fact that the three candidates for the Scottish election, which is happening, leaders of the SNP, which is happening today, all three of them say 5 years, and that seems to be much more reasonable. Anyway, he talked about the changes. He was encouraged to talk about the changes he saw being a Dublin man. And he said about how there was Christian Brothers education then, and essentially he was critical of that, I think. For some reason, I guess, but not. I hesitate to blank it, be totally negative in terms of the CBS. But anyway, he talked about rugby. It used to be seen as a sport of the elite, and now it's the best rugby team in the world is Ireland. I don't know what that has to do with anything really.
I think what he's talking. I think what he's talking about there, Jude, is I think Sam, the way it was phrased, Sam, does the Ireland that exists back in your day is it the same Ireland now? And the point he was making, not at all, Jude. And that point actually, I could relate to the one he said that they used to go to 11 o'clock mass and it would be jam packed. And he said it was Ireland back then was near enough a theocracy, and it was, Jude. Jesus Christ, of course it was. But anyway, he said now that he strolled into there quite recently, the 11 o'clock mass. I think it's Crumlin, and he said all he could see was a sparsely populated church with, he says, people like me, old people. Jude, I remember as a child, there was 3 masses in a small town in Letterkenny, and every one of them was jam-packed. No, I don't know what it's like nowadays.
That's an accurate description, I agree. He's really a sort of personal story he's telling, and I suppose his experience is similar to that of hundreds, thousands of other people. He was asked, was he nostalgic for it at all? And he said, no, not at all. And then he came to the biggest, Sam McBride said, you call your book Perils and Possibilities, not Pearls, Pearls, but Perils. The perils, the dangers and possibilities of United Ireland. What's the biggest danger? And he said the biggest danger was that the conflict would flip, as he put it. That is to say, from a small or a minority who were chafing against being part of Northern Ireland, you would have it the other way around. You'd have a united Ireland with a large unionist minority who would be feeling alienated and so on. And his solution, it seemed to me, he seemed to be saying that the alliance, the sort of answer to that might be where you get the Alliance Party to join with Sinn Féin enthusiastically for a border poll. And he says Alliance wants to know what a united Ireland would look like, as we all would, I think. And Alliance, he also seemed to suggest, Alliance wanted to see a functioning Northern Ireland first, a Northern Ireland working. And again, wouldn't we all? And he made a point, I'm not sure whether I agree or whether I disagree, that's the truth. He said, you want to have Northern Ireland that's functioning to show that, if nothing else, that Sinn Féin is capable of government. On the other hand, he says you don't want to make it too successful, Northern Ireland. Otherwise, there'll be a large part of the Catholic population, middle class, who'll say, I'm comfortable enough. I don't want to change from this. I think he has a point there.
I think he's a big point there, Jude. In fact, that very point there, I have said, and I subscribe to it on a personal level. You know, those years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement and before Brexit, there was, Jude, I have zero doubt, and it's not anecdotal, it's empirical. I met plenty of people. There was a lot of middle, you call them soft Catholics or soft nationalists, and I've met them. They were absolutely getting into the groove of living in Northern Ireland. now they could have their Irish language, they could have their street signs in Irish, they could, there's no more discrimination in regard to housing. The jobs were available. Suddenly, the editor of the BBC's political, a fellow called Enda McLafferty, no more Sammy or whatever. You know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And those people had sort of accepted Northern Ireland and were going along with it and quite happy to go to Donegal for their Easter holidays and our summer holidays or whatever. And there was a sort of an acceptance. Look, we're Irish, but we're living in Northern Ireland under the British state. But hey, it's not bad. We can, we'll live with it, and incrementally it'll get better for us. And
is that the way things are now?
No, it's not. Brexit's changed all that. There was almost what happened was somebody tried to put the whole thing in reverse gear, and I blame the DUP for that. They saw an opportunity in Brexit to break the link with Europe, and they thought that would bring back the halcyon days of the 1940s and 50s in Northern Ireland, where only Britain ruled and where they could have a big say, and to hell with the Irish government, because basically the Good Friday Agreement was all part of a big conspiracy theory, all this sort of bullshit. Jude, I think Brexit absolutely changed everything.
Mm-hmm. He talks about, O'Malley talks about the Good Friday Agreement was based on the notion of two major camps.
Yeah.
Unionists on one side, nationalist Republicans on the other. But he makes considerable, I think, he makes considerable emphasis, or puts considerable emphasis on the notion of the middle, that the Alliance Party and those who aren't hung up on the constitutional question, this is a growing body of people.
Yeah.
And I think he believes that there should be changes in the Good Friday Agreement to reflect this, and that it was built in the notion that you'd have just unionists, essentially unionists and nationalists / Republicans, and now you have this big Alliance Party group, and that the Good Friday Agreement should it evolved into the St. Andrews Agreement, so why shouldn't it evolve further?
Yeah.
Does that seem sensible to you, or is it that, as I think Sam McBride suggested, if you start unpicking a bit of the Good Friday Agreement, the whole thing might unravel?
I think that's the danger, Jude. Now, St. Andrews definitely tweaked it. It sort of basically made it a two-horse race, and the middle ground was sort of shifted away. And O'Malley does have a point there, Jude, because what was it? The Alliance got 13 or 14% at the last election. Now, that's a very big middle ground, and it seems, I don't know whether it's going to continue, but it seems to be growing. And a lot of young people, I've heard that a lot of young people now who had no experience of the Troubles, particularly in places like Belfast, aren't hung up like their fathers were on Paisley and on Gerry Adams and whatever. A lot of them are sort of middle of the road and just want to get on with life. Now, Jude, I don't have personal experience of that, so I'm only sort of passing that on from what I've heard.
Well, what about Derry? What about Derry? Is
well, Derry. Well, hey, Judah, I've heard a long held a view that Derry is just another part of Donegal, or Donegal is just another part of Derry, because that whole northern thing just never really worked in Derry. Like Derry people are very different from you'd find up around Ards or Bangor or whatever. Derry just like I never even hardly noticed the difference between Derry and Donegal, and I'm frequently in both. So like what I'm saying, Jude, I think is the whole. No, I'll just drop it because I've made the same point. I'm just probably going to end up making the same point again. Sorry, go ahead, you.
Well, think of reframing it. I'll just say this. He seemed, again, I need to look at the video again because I just went through it once. He seemed to be saying in the video that the idea of a voluntary coalition mightn't be a bad idea. That'd be part of this evolution of the Good Friday Agreement. That whereas you have a mandatory coalition of unionists and nationalists, that you really maybe should have a coalition of the willing.
He said alliance. Sinn Féin and the SDLP might be a workable alliance.
And who knows, maybe someday unionists and alliance, or unionists and SDLP, or Sinn Féin. But a voluntary coalition was somebody was suggested. And Sam McBride made a good point, I thought. He made it and then was left. He said there's a danger there that it was a compulsory coalition, was a mandatory coalition, was fine with unionism as long as they were the top dog. When unionism no longer was the top dog, then, we've got to go to a voluntary coalition.
Yeah.
He felt that was the reason. People might see that as being the reason for it. Do you think that's a reasonable?
I could see why unions would see it. Wait a minute, there was a mandatory coalition to ensure the minority were treated equally. But now that we're the minority, that it's no longer necessary. I can see how that could be interpreted that way. Now, I don't think that was the intention, because I think basically they're sort of saying that this no, that's push pull. You lose, we won, you lose. That we can't keep going on that way. But I can see, if I was a unionist, how I could interpret that. That was a good point by Sam, actually.
He seems to, from what you heard of him, would you want to read the book? Do you think you...
Jude, anybody that can sit down and write 500 pages and get, and by the way, I'm not knocking the book. I don't agree with, just because I don't agree with some, I'm not suggesting for a second that this isn't an important book, far from it. But what I would like to read it. In fact, I definitely will read it, Jude, because I'll go out of my way to find it now. I quite enjoy it. 30 quid. I'll borrow the money off you. But no, Jude, I think at this stage, the more that's put out there that people can sit down and read and think about. Jude, see the days of, you just resorting to violence to sort everything out and so on. We had our sort of, you start off by saying the threat of loyalist violence. Jude, let me get this clear. And I am deadly serious. I have met over the past, say, 5-6 years, quite a few old IRA guys, and they have the same attitude that, look, if anybody wants to start a war again, bring it on. The days of us going back into our corners and accepting no second-class citizen and, all our rights are, So in other words, Jude, there's a certain attitude embedded in both communities, and if we cannot get beyond that and solve things in a way through political negotiation, we're just going to keep on repeating the same old problems.
Well, I like you would welcome the it seems, well, he sounds like a very thoughtful man.
Yeah.
Maybe even overly thoughtful, but and if the book reflects that thoughtfulness, I guess that would be a good thing. I suspect that I would disagree with him and come to different conclusions from him. But I like you, I would be quite interested in finding out more about what the detail of what he wrote. And perhaps if there was more of that, it'd be good. But even more important, I think, would be that Sam McBride or whoever should ask questions about what he thought of a citizens' assembly. I thought there should have been much more emphasis on that, rather than to just toss it in and say, well, people say, that they'd be in favor of looking at the question of the monarchy, looking at the question of British identity and so on. I would like to have had a bit more discussion of the whole idea of citizens' assembly and when might you set one up and how worthwhile would it be.
By the way, Jude, I get the impression, and I'm open to correction on it, that Fianna Fáil and possibly Fine Gael are running away from the idea of a citizens' assembly, setting one up in regard to discussing the future of this island. I've heard Micheál Martin, he set up the Taoiseach Shared Island or project, or whatever the hell it's called, and so on. Now, Jude, I'm told they're doing things like, the Erin waterways and all that. But Jude, that's been going on for 20, 30 years. Yeah. So I don't know how and they're talking about various other cross-border projects. Now, how new they are, or how original they are, or how innovative they are, I don't know. But I'll go back to the point I started out with. What's the big problem for the government now setting up a citizens' assembly to look at the future of Ireland? By the way, there was someone who noticed Colin Eastwood was on I saw him, I think it's Saturday night, SDLP thing was on Saturday, their
Yes.
annual convention, and he kept referring to a new Ireland. And I saw him on his party political broadcast. I think it was on Friday night, and I thought it was new language. He talked about a new Ireland, and he even spoke a wee bit of Irish at the end of it. And it was shades of, I thought it was Sinn Féin light, if you know what I mean. He's moved
Mm.
the party slightly to the left. Because all the time that I knew John Hume, and I knew him for well over 20 years, John Hume, I don't ever recall having a really serious discussion with him about a United Ireland. It wasn't on John's radar.
No.
John was basically about fairness and human rights and about getting, political representation and equity and all this sort of stuff, which is very laudable. I'm not knocking that at all. But
Mm.
John didn't see a new Ireland or maybe down the track when we saw this part might have been on, but he rarely mentioned it. But Colin has.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't hear Colin, but I guess that it's not a surprise that the SDLP has moved because they really don't have a choice. If they were to come out and say, "Well, we're happy as British citizens," I think their vote would just plummet.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason, of course, the reason, Pat, why there is no citizens' assembly or talk of it, and that is, I think it was Micheál Martin that said, "Well, that would be divisive. It would," and in a
Yeah,
way
that's
he's
what
right. In a way he's right. If they were to set up a citizens' assembly to look at the possibilities of a united Ireland, the unionist reaction would be, I'm certain, the Irish government is in favour of a united Ireland. And that's putting the squeeze on us. Would you say that would be likely?
Yeah, but just because that they're going to say it, they're going to say that anyway. They're going to say that in 20 years' time, so it doesn't really matter. But what I think would be far more important is that if the Dublin government set out the terms of reference for a forum or citizens' assembly, and it's clearly spelt out that it's non-prescriptive, that we're simply now setting up a forum where people can come and make submissions. That, by the way, wasn't there a New Ireland Forum set up in the 1980s or something? Wasn't
Yeah,
there?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and invite unionists, invite the Brits, invite everybody along, and sort of say, and at the end of it, there's no sort of coercion involved here. Here is what we, the reality. Jude, the reality of life in Ireland today is the demographics have changed totally. In the north now, there are more nationalist Catholics than there are unionists. The days of unionist dominance are over, and it's quite clear, Jude, that the Brits have other priorities, and if they could get out of Northern Ireland now, they would. So I think unionism and loyalism had better face up to the fact that times have changed.
Hmm. I suppose they're banking on the fact that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will not want to have anything that would move them closer to United Ireland because they'll see it as a bunch of troublemakers in the north, and also, of course, it will change radically if a United Ireland emerged. It would change radically politics in the south. So they're hanging back. I think that Sinn Féin and other parties that are in favour of United Ireland should be putting pressure every day on the Irish government and say, look, you haven't thought of doing a citizens' assembly. You haven't set one up. You haven't even talked about it.
Yeah.
Why? And I think let's say 6 months to a year where people would discuss, would it be a good idea to have a citizens' assembly about a united Ireland? And I think the answer inevitably would be yes. And when that happened, they should set one up and get it cracking.
Yeah.
They were putting citizens' assemblies for everything you can think of, except
Yes.
the big thing that dominates and has dominated Irish political life
Yeah.
for, I don't know, many hundreds of years.
Yeah. Jude, by the way, our friend Mr. O'Malley also remember, and Sam McBride alluded to it as well, that both Craig and Carson were both very much in favour of Irish unity. In fact, Craig sort of suggested we cannot stay apart. Unification will eventually come about again. Now, he saw unification coming about under Britain, but even they recognised the fact that unity would eventually happen, or reunification would eventually happen, that we were too small of an island for it to continue in perpetuity. But Jude, when you look at it, here we have two police forces, two governments, two law societies, two health systems, on one small island. And even then, when you look at it, drill down into it, in the north, you have the Catholic maintained sector, you have the sort of state-controlled schools, you have the integrated schools, and so on. And one small, Jesus, Jude, the overuse and the cost of that. You were, by the way, I have to mention, you mentioned the thing about the school principal in England who committed suicide after the Ofsted report last week. I was chatting yesterday evening to two teachers, and they were very, very much. I know I'm digressing, by the way. The thoughts or the feelings that you give, they absolutely echoed them. That it was disgraceful that somebody's life could be ruined by somebody walking in off the street in an inspection based on maybe one day's performance. But anyway, that's a side issue.
Well, yeah, and maybe they might want to take that on board whenever they're setting up a new curriculum and a whole new education system. I mean, it's a real opportunity if you stop to think about it. There's so many areas of Irish life, whether it's health or whether it's education or whether it's economy, they really do need a radical look at. Not to say, oh, we'll manage it better, but to say, what kind of system would work best? There's no good in taking a model. It's like an old car, There's no point in putting on wee bits and making it run a wee bit smoother. If there's a possibility you could get a totally new car or a different car that would, solve many of the problems that the old one's given you.
Jude, here's an impossible question for you to answer, but I'm going to ask it. Is there any way that loyalism could accept being part of United Ireland with assurances that their identity would be respected and, whatever?
Well, if you say loyalism, this annoys me, this loyalism, unionism thing. Loyalism sounds to me like the working class unionism, or are they saying that it's a violent part of unionism? And if so, why don't they say it's a violent part of unionism? I figure there'll be some people who will not really accept any part of it. Just as I would say there were Protestants in the South, when the South was established, who really didn't want to be there. And quite a number of them on the border crossed over into Northern Ireland. There are people, there's bound to be people who are going to resist change. But you shouldn't underestimate the fact, two things, I think, that there are a lot of people, I think, within unionism who are thoughtful people who see the way that Britain is treating them and who see the advantages of being part of a united Ireland within Europe. So those people shouldn't be counted out. And the second thing is, we haven't even begun to look at the thing in a systematic way. So how would you expect unionists or loyalists to be in favour of United Ireland if we don't know what the thing's going to look like? I think that we come back to that again. And I thought that was one flaw maybe in O'Malley. Maybe it's not in his book, but it was a flaw in that discussion. We didn't hear enough about the planning for a new Ireland. Okay, time's running out, Pat, in our 5 minutes. You listed a number of things, but just since today is the day, in fact, within hours, we'll know who's going to be the leader of the Scottish National Party. Now, at one time, I had great hopes for the Scottish National Party, and I thought that they might get independence even in the next referendum. But all of that seems to have fallen apart. Is it as bad? The new leader will be appointed or announced within a couple of hours, and there's three people. There's this guy
Hamza.
Hamza, and he was the what was he? Was he the business minister or?
I can't remember, Jude.
He was one of her ministers.
He's considered a progressive, even though he's a Muslim. He's apparently the most progressive.
Yeah, and then there's this rather right-wing young woman.
Whose name escapes me as well.
Yeah, Kate. Anyway, and then there is this woman who has no chance.
She's the third leg of the stool.
So my question is, Pat, very briefly, has the whole Scottish independence project really disemboweled itself?
I think it has, Jude. It reminds me, or has echoes of what happened in Spain about 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Remember at Barcelona, where the whole thing sort of imploded. I think there's no way the British government will ever allow another independence referendum again. It got very close the last time, and it was very divisive. And Jude, I think they're scared. Jude, can you imagine one part of Britain? No, they would have the exact same problems as we're having in regard to Brexit if England stayed out of Europe and Scotland was in it. So they'd have to come up with borders. They'd have to start working out a tax system and a tariff system. They would have to start working out currency. One part would be in possibly in Euroland, and the other would be in sterling. And I think they're sort of saying we're one landmass. Would we have to have borders at Scotland? Would we have to have because the EU, Jude, they are never going to allow that. Never. Either they all go back in or they all stay out. And I think at this stage, the history is so interlinked now that I think the days of Scottish independence are over, because they voted against it, Jude. They had one opportunity and they blew it. But by the way, Jude, I remember, and I'll finish up, we had an old Scottish friend years ago. He used to come over and stay every summer with us for about a week, and he was a total Scottish nationalist. And the reason he was a nationalist, he hated English. He said they stole everything from Scotland. They took the revenue, and then in later years they took the oil revenue. They used to take the whiskey revenue and all the rest of it. And he says they took all the industrial, the wealth of the shipyard. And he basically, his nationalism was based on hatred of the English. So I don't know whether that's still the case.
Well, I imagine, I mean, if you were to be blunt, and sometimes English people find this hard to understand. The fact that you have a United Kingdom was because England conquered Ireland, conquered Scotland, conquered Wales.
Yeah.
England is the boss. So, of course, you're going to have people who don't like the English. And, of course, you're going to have movements like for Scottish independence or Irish unity once again. So it shouldn't be surprising to people. I just wondered, I was hoping that Scotland could be a model. It just is frightening how quickly what seemed so well organized, so far down the road, should just suddenly implode. Just the whole thing fall apart.
That thing about the gender thing in Scotland, the Westminster government pulled the plug on that one, so it showed how impotent the Scottish Parliament really is. And then they've discovered that there's 30,000 members missing from the SNP, and Sturgeon's husband was as the chairman or chief executive, and never mentioned it. And it looks like they're not achieving a way lot. So, Jude, I think they've gone up to the hill, but they're coming back down again.
So, have we any lessons to learn from that?
Well, Jude, no, I think we're on a different island, so it's not quite the same. I was firmly of the opinion that the last thing Westminster would ever do would allow a second referendum, and I'm sticking rigidly by that, because Jude, the implications of it would be so massive.
Yeah. Just for the record, because it'll be announced shortly, which of the three candidates do you think is going to win that election for Scottish leader?
I think Hampshire will win it. He might be more popular outside the party than inside it, but I think he might win it.
Okay. On that note, go back to Mother Nature. Enjoy the sunshine, Pat, because it's going to start raining again.
Friday.
We're getting very good viewing numbers, incidentally.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, Jude.
Bye.